Hey, count us down, folks. Welcome to episode 5 of Missouri Swagger. I'm the Sophos, that's called Bud, looking good, as per usual,
That's right.
and
Hello,
we're
everyone.
with you. Hello. We should wave, I suppose.
Do you
Uh,
do you
I'm going to
like
talk
Guinness?
about
I
hi.
wore in honor of this broadcast. I wore my Woo Tang shirt because
I
today
do
we're
like.
going to talk about wrestling.
We are going to talk about wrestling, and that is one Wu Tang shirt. I love it.
It's fancy, right?
Man, Nature Boy ain't nothing to fuck with.
No, never.
So,
Um,
Howard,
so
what
yeah,
do you
I'm,
got?
I'm excited to talk about this because I feel like you and I have very different experiences when it comes to professional wrestling.
Absolutely.
Because we grew up in different eras and in different parts of the world or in different parts of the country, and so we grew up, I think, with kind of uh, being involved in watching different professional wrestling. And I mean, I'm thinking. I mean, I've got right here a copy of this fancy trade paperback, the
That's a
WWE,
Then Now Forever,
written by
written by
you.
Dennis Hopeless.
That's right. And so you obviously, have an interesting perspective, I think, because you're writing these official comics.
Yes, official WWE. Those are not fan fiction.
That's
That
right.
is
So,
all canon. I don't know if that's true.
so I guess, and I know the answer to this, but I don't know that everyone watching may know. I mean, how much of a wrestling fan were you before you started working on that book?
Well, when I was a little kid, I was super into it because I like '84. I would have been 3 years old. So like at the
Right.
height of you know Hulk Hogan, Macho Man, Andre the Giant, Ultimate Warrior. That was like my early childhood.
Yes.
So I was really into it as much as you can be into things as a little kid with no cable. So I watched it every chance I got. I liked it. I watched the cartoon when it had the cartoon. But my family wasn't real into it. Like my dad thought it was amusing for a couple minutes before he'd go fishing or whatever.
Right.
But it's not like I went to live shows or whatever. Also, at the time, like before that, before my time, Kansas City was a pretty big territory. Harley Race had territory here. There's a bunch of like there were Ric Flair, Dusty Rhodes title matches here.
Right.
So like it was a thing, but that was all before my time. And yeah, I didn't go see WWE live, and local wrestling wasn't a thing I was aware of as a kid. So I was into it then, and then kind of fell out when it dropped off a little bit in the early '90s, and then around the time of the NWO invasion of WCW, some friends got into it and dragged me in. These were guys that had like they'd go to Blockbuster and rent all of the VHS tapes of WWE stuff, and so they showed me the backstory to the build
Right.
up of Diesel and Ramon leaving, and then I was like all in for first of all WCW's NWO stuff and Sting in the rafters and all that, and then like when Stone Cold popped up in WWE, which was WWF then, and then it was the Monday Night War. So for a while, I was like flipping back and forth between the two shows in the
Yeah.
whenever that was, mid '90s. And so yeah, I was really into it till probably '98, '99, and then I don't know, I was more of a WCW guy, and WCW like kind of took a hard story dive after a while with the NWO stuff, so I fell off.
Yeah.
Um, and then for years, I would pop into Wikipedia to like catch up because you could catch up with storylines and see what everybody did and where they went, but never really watched it again. And then I don't know, 5 years ago, Jason Aaron, who's a good friend of mine and here lives here in town, his son Dash got into it. It
Right.
got to be the right age to get into it, and then Jason jumped in like whole hog and started watching it and wouldn't shut up about it. And so if you go to Jason's house, if he got drunk enough, he would put on like New Japan and uh, yeah, and WWE stuff. And
Right.
so I started watching it again. I started watching it regularly. I started recording Raw, and then I was pretty well all in as of 2013, 2014.
Right.
And I've been, yeah, like a weekly watcher ever since.
All right. So you know what you're talking about with these comics, I guess.
Yeah, well, and the comics, I have to rewatch stuff all the time in the comics. Again, all of the stuff almost all of the matches in the comics take place in an actual pay-per-view or something. So I rewatch a lot of stuff from the last couple of years. And for those who don't know the way the comics work, we want them to be canon, like we want them to make sense with storylines, but we can't stay current because it takes a month to make a comic. And WWE, because of injuries and because of how their creative works, they have to be able to bob and weave at all times. So we are writing the story between the stories and behind the scenes of WWE storylines from the last couple of years. So like that trade you got there is the story of Seth Rollins leaving the Shield, becoming a bad guy, rising to become Mr. Money in the Bank, winning his title, getting injured, and then coming back from that. So it's like the rise and fall of Seth Rollins. And the matches are the matches that happened that you saw, but everything else is like the Friday Night Lights of it. Like we're telling the story of what went on that week and the interpersonal stuff and what was going on in Seth's head. So it really fleshes out the existing storylines in a fun way. It's also critically acclaimed. I mean, everyone loves this comic. This might be the greatest wrestling comic that was ever written.
I'm sure it is.
Very popular.
I don't think, has there ever really been, I mean, I know there have been wrestling comics, but not like this, right? This was this is pretty ambitious.
They wanted something to be a little bit more like the product. Because in the past they've done stuff where it was mostly like amping up the characters to make them a little bit more like comic book characters, which are like horror books or superhero books, so like just really making it crazy. And those never seemed to really resonate with fans because it wasn't, like that's not what they like about wrestling.
Right.
And so when I got the job, and I tried really hard to not get the job because I was busy with Marvel work. And I love wrestling, so when they reached out, I'm like, oh, I'd love to do a one-shot or a short story or whatever. They're like, well, actually, why don't you do the ongoing? And I was like, yeah, well, I would need, and like they were like really good salespeople. My friend Jasmine Amiri was the editor on the book at the time, right. And she just wouldn't stop like knocking my objections down like she was trying to sell me a used car. And so at the end, I was like, well, okay. And the last thing was...
She was pile driving your objections.
She was.
Yes.
But my last thing that I said was, well, I don't think that a comic book that's 20 pages of wrestling is going to work very well because we get to see that on TV. Like, what's fun about wrestling is seeing two giant men throw each other around. A drawing of that's not the same thing, especially in a medium where we see people punching the sun and stuff. So what I would want to do is interpersonal drama in between the matches, thinking that was going to be a no-go. And I said Friday Night Lights, and she said, we literally had Friday Night Lights written down on the piece of paper. I had that conversation.
I was in the car with you when you were having that call.
We were in a New York City taxi cab heading to an X-Men retreat.
Oh, yeah, it was X-Men. I was trying to remember what that was, but I remember listening to you talking to, I guess it was Jasmine on the other...
It was Jasmine and Eric Hartman and Bryce Maythorne.
Yeah, so I remember listening to you have that conversation. I thought to myself, is Dennis talking about doing a wrestling comic? Because this is the first I'd heard heard of it. You hadn't mentioned it to me before, so it was kind of it was kind of surreal and interesting to hear you have to hear the one side of that conversation. So I was.
But no,
I take credit for your success.
You should take credit for all my success.
I feel like you being around me at that moment helped you take that project. And
you being rude to me when I bought The Damned from you at a comic convention like 10 years ago is what propelled me forward because I thought I'm gonna lap this Cullen Bunn. I'm
pretty sure I wasn't rude to you, but I have a mean resting face. And
you were polite to me when I was giving you money for the book, but when I emailed you later to tell you what I thought, you ignored me. And when I brought it up after that, you acted like you didn't know what I was talking about.
Well, I still don't know what you're talking about.
Well, see, now that I've done shows as a more high-profile creator and talked to a billion people and try to remember any of those interactions, I understand. But at the time,
I feel like I would have responded to you. But all right, whatever.
It's fine. Okay, so what's you have a better, because you're from the Carolinas, you got a much better wrestling past as a child. Right?
Well, in the 80s in the Carolinas, wrestling was that was a huge deal. It was it was very popular. I was not into I was not into Hogan and Randy Savage. I mean, I watched that on Sunday afternoons or Saturday afternoons. I would still watch that wrestling. I guess that was at WWF at the time. And I would still watch that, but it was always, to me, that was always cartoony wrestling.
Right.
I thought it was really, I thought it was even more fake than the wrestling I was watching on the regular, which was NWA, which became WCW, and that was the wrestling with, you know, Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes and the Rock and Roll Express and the Midnight Express and Magnum TA and
best wrestler ever.
And Nikita Koloff and the Road Warriors. So I mean, and I was into that. I was watching that 3 times a week, you know, and I was watching it with my family. I remember my mom had a big crush on Ric Flair.
Every mom had a big crush on Ric Flair.
Right, and I had a cousin. Well, all the girls at school, and I had a cousin who was really into Magnum TA. They thought he was the greatest thing that ever walked the face.
I mean, that might be the sexiest man who ever lived. He had that like curly hair in the back that laid across the shoulders. He had the chest hair that was all perfectly groomed to the same length.
Well, I will tell you that Magnum TA changed my relationship with wrestling.
How did he do it?
So we used to go to the matches all the time. I mean, we went to the Raleigh State Fairgrounds. They'd have matches once every other month or once a month, and we'd go on a regular basis and watch. You know, it was an hour drive, but we would go to watch these matches. Sometimes we'd go to Fayetteville. Most of the time we'd go to Raleigh and watch them. And even on one of my birthdays, my dad flew the whole family to New Orleans to watch the Jim J. Crockett Memorial Tag Team Tournament, the first one, and for like it was a huge 3-day big event, you know, which I guess at the time was sort of like what you know, it's not on the scale of say a WrestleMania, but it's sort of what that was.
It's a big damn deal.
It was a big deal. But at one of those events, we stayed overnight, and we were staying in the hotel where all the wrestlers were staying. And I had a program, and I wanted to, you know, I was down in the lobby, and all the wrestlers were there. And at the time, I was really into the face wrestlers. I was like, these, you know, the good guys were the ones I wanted to follow because, you know,
sure,
you want to follow heroes. And Magnum TA comes walking through the crowd, and I was like, Magnum, can I get you to sign my, sign my program? And he just he's like, nah, kid, not right now. And he just walked on. He was a real jackass. and I was standing there. I was young at the time, and I was standing there sort of heartbroken. And beautiful Bobby Eaton, who was one half of the Midnight Express, at the time, very big villains in the in their group. He was standing over and he says, "Hey kid, come over here. I'll sign that book for you." So I walked over and he was super cool to me and talked to me for like, I don't know, 10 minutes or whatever. And I was like, wow, this villain's the coolest guy I've met in wrestling. He's awesome. And from that day forward, I was a fan of the villains. And I will tell you that back then it was not cool to be fans of the villains. Nowadays it feels like being a fan of a villain, that's fine. The villains are, you know, first of all, the faces and the heels switch very quickly, and sometimes you can't tell them apart, and that's cool in its own right. But back then, you did not cheer for a villain. And I was at one of the matches in Raleigh. You know, we were sitting on the floor right up, you know, near the ring, and it was a Russian chain match between Magnum TA and Nikita Koloff. And I started cheering for Nikita. And in the 80s, in Raleigh, North Carolina, you don't cheer for the Russian Nightmare.
No.
I mean, everybody in the crowd was looking at me. They were throwing popcorn. They were angry that I was cheering for Nikita Koloff. But let's face it, Nikita Koloff was one of the best wrestlers that's ever lived. He's my favorite wrestler, far better than any of your favorites. Nikita Koloff was a beast and deserved that praise. But yeah, you don't cheer for Nikita Koloff in Raleigh.
You were a groundbreaking wrestling fan.
I was. I think someone saw me cheering Nikita, and they said, that guy, that's what we need to start gearing towards, that guy, and people who really like the villains. And then from that day forward, I was into the Midnight Express. I was into Midnight Express and Nikita Koloff, and the Road Warriors were one of the first that kind of bridged that gap between, you know, good guy, bad guy, but I was all about the Road Warriors. And just the villains in general were always always my favorites. And the Four Horsemen, of course, the greatest
Sure.
villain group ever. The Four Horsemen quickly catapulted to be right up there at the top of my list. And really, the only face I still watched and cared about was Dusty Rhodes.
Because Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream.
Because Dusty Rhodes, the American Dream.
The man.
He is. And I remember at that Jim J. Crockett Memorial Cup Tag Team Tournament, Dusty and Nikita teamed up as the Superpowers because that was after Magnum's accident and he wasn't wrestling anymore. And I remember that was a big deal. And then now everybody's cheering for Nikita because all of a sudden he's Dusty Rhodes' friend. And all right.
My favorite thing about this story is the reason that you started cheering villains is the same reason you do everything, which is revenge over someone slighting you.
That's absolutely right.
You don't want Cullen Bunn to dislike you. You don't want to be on the wrong side of Cullen Bunn because he will try to destroy you forever.
No, it's not about destroying. It's just about I want them to feel terrible. I want Magnum TA to know that he could have had me as a friend. And I met Bobby Eaton again just a few years ago at a convention in Cape Girardeau, and got like I did a picture with him and got a signed picture, and I bought his book that he had there, and he was still a super nice guy. He didn't remember meeting me back then though.
Did you ever meet?
I told him that story, but he didn't remember it.
Sure. Well, imagine how many people that man is. Also, how many times he's been dropped on his head.
He's in Missouri now. He's got Missouri swagger. Bobby Eaton's a Missouri guy now.
I mean, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Right.
Yeah, Jim Cornette has an awesome podcast where he talks about old wrestling stories, and he talks about, and I don't know how much of this is real and how much of it is like the legend of professional wrestling, but he talks about fans like wanting to attack them after matches whenever they would cheat and win, and having to like have police escorts to get the hell out of the building and stuff.
Yeah.
That man is wildly entertaining.
Yeah, he's great. He was awesome as a wrestling manager, and now he's awesome, in the stories he tells. Because I've watched.
So did you get to see him live, or?
Yeah.
Oh, that's awesome. Jim Cornette, he might be my favorite wrestling personality of all time. He's like if you took my dad and made him a little more Southern fried, and then made him only talk about wrestling instead of cars.
Yeah, hands down, he's my favorite wrestling manager. I mean, I don't think anyone's ever topped him. He was so animated.
Right.
When he stomps around that ring, and he has that tennis racket.
Stupid tennis racket. Yeah.
And I remember because building up to it, to that tag team tournament, they did the seeds of who was number one, and I mean, he was furious that the Road Warriors were ranked number one while the Midnight Express were the world champions, and they were ranked number two. And that was and of course the Road Warriors and Midnight Express got to duke it out. Road Warriors won.
Yeah, well, the good guys have to prosper.
Yeah, but
yeah, anybody who loves, if you don't know anything about Jim Cornette, you watch modern wrestling. Paul Heyman drinks from the Jim Cornette cup. Paul Heyman does Jim Cornette, like a modern version of Jim Cornette. Like those guys are very much cut from the same cloth. And I love Paul Heyman. He's amazing. But yeah, Jim Cornette did it first.
Yeah, no, he was great. And yeah, I was really into it for many years, and then it sounds like I was getting out of it around the time you were starting to get into it the first time,
right?
Because I remember when Sting turned into the Crow, he was that was around that I was already not really watching it too often then, just occasionally. And then that was kind of the moments I got out of it, and then I'd keep up with it occasionally.
NWA fans got kind of screwed by the Monday Night Wars because WCW got purchased by Turner, and then they tried to turn it into WWE and succeeded, became really popular, made a bunch of money, but that Ric Flair style hard nose, make this look real and nasty wrestling just kind of fell out of it. I mean, it didn't go away. They just became more local, and then eventually all that stuff kind of got swallowed up. So, yeah, there's an amazing Ric Flair 30 for 30, HBO.
Yeah.
That's it. It's not no sports. That's not HBO. It's HBO's the giant one. It's ESPN.
Yeah.
It's incredible, and it's just Ric Flair telling stories about how much he used to drink and have party, and how awesome those times were.
Well, he was, limousine riding, baby.
Yeah, my favorite story in there is he talks about I guess it's a woman telling a story. He's with some woman or some women one night, and he was wearing a Rolex, and she was talking about his Rolex, and he takes the Rolex off and throws it into a pot of spaghetti, and she's like, "What? That watch is worth whatever." And he's like, "I got 4 of them at home."
At one time I was talking to Boom about doing a backup story in the WWE books, and it was going to be about 4 horsemen, and I was going to do a fictionalized version of a story I'd heard growing up, and that was this guy had told me he worked at the Pantry, which was sort of like a 7-Eleven, 7-Eleven convenience store, and one of the nights of one of the matches, this dude was he told the story of this match that this limousine pulls up in the parking lot, and Ric Flair comes boiling out of the back and comes in, and all he wants to buy are some pickled eggs, and he buys some 2 or 3 pickled eggs and eats them and goes back and gets in the car and drives away, and that was this dude's claim to fame, is Ric Flair bought pickled eggs from me.
Right.
And I wanted to tell a story about Ric Flair and the 4 Horsemen going into this convenience store and buying pickled eggs, and then these dudes in the back had set up a wrestling ring, and they wanted to live the styling and profiling lifestyle, and they were trying to live the 4 Horsemen lifestyle, and they challenged the 4 Horsemen to a match. And I don't know why we never did that story.
Probably you found out I was writing the main book and didn't
No,
want to
this
be
was
back
after
up.
I already knew you were writing the main book, and I just wanted to tell a Ric Flair story, but I just think it kind of died on the vine. It's probably my fault. I probably didn't follow up on it the way I should have.
I think that series is editorially a pain because they have to do those backups in every single issue, and they have to get everything approved by WWE. I'm jealous of the backups though. Like getting to do those little one-offs is it seems like it'd be really fun. That's one of the things I'm really enjoying about this. We're doing an NXT weekly. Maybe starts next month. But yeah, they're one-issue stories about different eras of NXT. So I'm getting to do different things every month, which is fun.
So you already know. Did you say who your favorite wrestler was?
My favorite wrestler of all time is Razor Ramon.
That's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah. My favorite current wrestler is Bayley. And then and that's my favorite. It's not who I think is the best. Like Ric Flair and Dusty Rhodes are the 2 best wrestlers of all time, I think. Like Dusty on mic and both of them in the ring. Both of them, they're a whole total package.
Yeah, they were awesome. They
massive cults of personality, and they were amazing.
They had the best bumpers, and they were always great.
Right. But my favorite, when I was really, really into it, was Razor Ramon. Like watching old Razor Ramon stuff in the middle of the video was really funny because he was doing silly voice, and I just really enjoyed it. I actually was Razor Ramon for Halloween couple of years ago, and there are embarrassing photos of me online with gold chains around my neck and a vest with a shirt on.
Awesome. I'm going to look those. Actually, I'm going to add those to this video. I'm going to find them and add them to the video so that people can see.
All right,
how you do that.
I'll send you.
Yeah, please send me one. And didn't you? Now you said Bayley. Was it Bayley one of the wrestlers you interviewed, or you were the moderator at a panel?
That thing.
Yeah, tell me about that panel.
Planet Comic-Con this last year, they asked me to moderate the Trish Stratus Lita panel. And Trish and Lita were the badass female wrestlers of the Attitude Era, which is a period of time where the women were not used for wrestling for the most part. Chyna was, and Chyna competed against men, and she was amazing. And then Trish and Lita came in and blew the doors off. They broke a lot of ground and had these amazing matches and this amazing rivalry, and they're friends in real life. So now they are retired and they do Comic-Cons and different wrestling shows and stuff, and they do these talks. So because I write the WWE book, they reached out to Boom to see if I would moderate the panel. Now, I've never moderated a panel before. I've been on lots of panels, but I thought, well, I'll just, I'll do a bunch of research. I'll have questions ready. I'll figure it out. And decided to moderate the panel. But when we do comic book panels, it is a relatively large room, usually. If it's San Diego or New York, it's a massive room. Sometimes it's a small room, but and you're sitting on a slightly elevated stage behind a table
Right.
with lights on you, but it's not like after you've done a couple, it's not super intimidating.
Right.
You're
And there's
usually on
usually
there.
not a lot of people in the room. I mean,
No.
yeah.
And if there are, like at San Diego or New York, you don't have to say much because the panel is about like the 12 people that are up there, and you answer, you talk about your book a little bit, and you sit and listen to people, and if you're me, you make jokes on what other people say, and then you listen to questions about movies that you don't know the answer to. Like that's what big panels are like. So my expectation was based on that. And I'm a little bit nervous because I've never met these women and because I've never moderated before, but I thought I got this. Like I've had bad moderators before where I had to like kind of take over and do it, and I thought, I can do this, it's fine.
Right.
So I show up for the panel, and immediately you realize there's a difference between being a comic book creator and being a celebrity when you're at a con. And I had never been to a celebrity panel because I go to cons for work, not as a fan.
Right.
So I walk into this giant room, and it's got a stage that is so brightly lighted that like you can't see anything else in the room. Like the sun is lighting the stage. And instead of a table with a banner on the front of it so you can't see your legs, there's a white couch, like an overstuffed white couch and an overstuffed white chair. And I walk in, and they hand me a microphone, and they start talking to me about how I need to get the crowd riled up first to get them excited and going. And I'm like, wait, I never. My fight or flight instinct has never kicked in harder. Like I wanted to drop that microphone and run. I start sweating. I'm wildly nervous. And then
The best.
Trish and Lita walk in, and they shake my hands. And Lita starts talking about this bit she wants to do. She's like, okay, before you introduce me, I don't remember what it was, but it was like some really simple bit she wanted to do. And I'm like, I look at her and like this, and I'm like, I've never done this before. I just read the comic book. I don't know why they asked me to do this. I'm really bad. And Lita's like, her face just like immediately changes to, okay, we're gonna have to deal with this shit. And so she kind of walks away. And then Trish is really sweet and came over and said, you're gonna be fine. We do this all the time. It's gonna be fine. Just go out there and ask questions. So we go out, and I walk into the light, and there's just like light beaming down in my face from all sides. I can't see the crowd at all, and I'm very nervous. And I immediately say, I've never done this before, I just read the comic book. Like I said the same thing in the same sad tone. I seem like the least confident human that's ever lived. And then I sit down and I introduce them. And I had written down how I wanted to introduce them. So I said the words, and I said it a little bit more confidently. But I'm, got my legs crossed. I'm very conscious of the fact that there's a camera like right at crotch level that's facing me. And I introduced them, and fortunately, they heard how bad my introduction was, and they came out and started giving me shit. And so it became a bit where I'm terrible at this, and like Trish is getting the crowd to like applaud me because I'm so bad, and then it became comfortable. And I'm capable of having a conversation, so I started the questions, they took over, and then I would ask follow-up questions, and it ended up being fine. But I was very juicy with sweat through that whole thing, and I will never, ever again agree to moderate anything.
Yeah, I only laugh because I know I would have been in the same. I would have hated that. That would have been the worst. Yeah. So, I mean, I wish I'd seen it. I'm sure there's video of it. I bet I can find video of it somewhere.
There's probably. I don't know, man.
All right. Well, I'm sure you did wonderful. I mean, I bet it was the best.
Who's swag? It's my turn for a swagger story.
It's your time for a swag story.
That one doesn't count because there's no swagger happening.
That's what I was. As you started, I was like, maybe this could be your swagger story, but then I realized that no, that is actually the opposite.
Missouri spineless worm. Yes. I didn't run away. Like the fact that I didn't run away shows that I have some courage.
Yes, it gives you a little bit, but also
that was my fight. If that's a version of my fight, you understand why I don't get in bar fights.
Also, you knew you had no choice but to stand there. You can't walk into a panel to moderate it and then say, "Oh, I gotta go." I mean,
when it's my hometown show, so it's not like I can just bounce.
You could have faked diarrhea or something, maybe. That would have been fun. That would have been a great story too. I'd have heard that at conventions for years and years to come.
All right, so Missouri swagger story. I will tell. This one's actually about me. Most of them are about my dad and my mom, but this is about me. So when I was in high school, my sophomore year of high school, so it would have been like '96-ish. Like right around the time of the NWO stuff happening. some friends of mine started a thing called ETW, Extreme Trampoline Wrestling.
Oh God.
And basically, as I understand it now, it was just an excuse for them to take their smaller siblings and throw them around on a trampoline. But these were the buddies that were, renting the old WWF VHS tapes and
Yeah.
getting me into ETW. So they wanted to do a pay-per-view. Like they wanted to like get video cameras out and do a real like backyard wrestling thing. And this is before backyard wrestling really blew up. Like the internet was nascent, and so
Yeah.
we didn't realize this was a thing a lot of people were doing because wrestling was blowing back up. But they asked me if I'd be interested because we'd been watching wrestling together. So I came over one night to talk about it. And when I was at that age, my parents were going through a divorce, and I was a little bit unhinged. Like not like super crazy, but my grades went a bit down, and I yelled at teachers, and I was kind of bad for 3 semesters. And this was the middle of that. So I come over, and we start watching wrestling, and they start like wrestling with their kid brothers and stuff, and I take it a little bit too far and like jump off the couch onto them and like put them in headlocks and was just sort of crazy that night. And then then I came up with a character, and I started writing storylines for this pay-per-view.
What's the character? Come on.
Character. I was the juvenile delinquent, and my finishing move was the classroom disruption. And it was I had a pad. I bought a knee pad that was going to be under these like shredded Tommy Hilfiger jeans that I had, and I was going to grab the person's head and bounce it off the knee pad, which would have been a terrible idea. Like this, you don't know how to deliver a wrestling move in a way that doesn't hurt the other person. So this was all planned. We were going to have a heel turn. We had all this stuff planned out for it. I bought face paint because we were like the good guy was going to change his face paint to be like mine, and we were going to become a thing. And I started like coming up with plans to build ropes around the trampoline because they were just doing it on a regular trampoline. And right before, like a week or two before we were going to do this pay-per-view, I called my buddy Joey to ask him about it, and he said, "We're not doing that anymore. You've taken this way too far. You've gotten way too excited about this. Like, this was just supposed to be a fun thing, and you're making it a big deal, and it's just not happening, Dennis. You're going to hurt somebody." And I was mortified. Like, I dropped it. I threw all the shit away. Like, I was really embarrassed that I had apparently been a crazy person. And this was, like, my secret shame for, the next couple of years. When I talked to Joey about it after college, we kind of reconnected after college. And come to find out, one of the little brothers or sisters got thrown off the trampoline and got hurt, and their parents told them they couldn't do it anymore. But Joey didn't, for whatever reason, didn't want to tell me that the mom and dad said no, so he pretended like my enthusiasm was a huge problem, and that's why we didn't do it.
Wow.
So
And
go ahead.
I've heard that teachers in your neck of the woods still talk in hushed whispers about Tommy Hilfiger wearing juvenile delinquent. Dennis
Everybody
Hopkins
worked on
and those three dark semesters.
They were rough. I got C's. It was bad news. I was the least delinquent juvenile delinquent, but I did disrupt class.
All right, well, I like that story. I like the idea that you killed a wrestling league at some point because of
I killed it.
your enthusiasm.
I killed it in the crib. Like, they never had an actual, they just named it. Before that, I think it was just literally throwing 9-year-olds around on a trampoline.
Well, that's, you legitimized it, and then they punished you for it. You
did.
The only thing people like more than a juvenile delinquent hero is to see a juvenile delinquent hero fail. And you were taken down by your own hubris.
Yes, as I often am. All right, folks, that's Missouri Swagger. That's episode 5. At some point, we should write this down so I don't have to remember what number it is. When we get to 12, I'll
You could go to the channel and see how many we have.
I knew.
All right.
I'm just worried that I'll lose track.
If you like this video, please subscribe.
When you like this video.
Yeah, when you like this video. Please subscribe and hit that little thumbs up button. And thanks for watching, everybody.
Yeah, thanks.